Hello, welcome to another episode of RTD News. And today, as you can tell from the title, Russia and China to bypass the dollar, and the pictures surrounding me, you can kind of get an idea where we're going to be heading today. And so I have about 6 or so articles I want to share with you, all dealing with recent events, as well as some events that has been building up over a while now in regards to the concept of called de-dollarization, which is something that is not a new term, but yet it may be new to some of you. And so I'll share some information with that as well. But before I actually get into the news, I want to inform you of some recent things I've done here at Rethinking the Dollar. And so a part of, helping people become more monetarily aware, I've came up with a concept called a dollarcation, and I'll include a link below this video here for you to find out more about it. But it's simply an infographic listing our entire nation's monetary history and some major policies and things that have come into play that has kind of shifted and altered the concept of a dollar. And so it's something that can be used as an educational tool for your friends and family that may not be too monetary savvy, and a way to just present some things to them. And if they're interested, they can, take a further look as far as researching some of the bullet points. So let's dive into today's articles right now. So here we have about, as I mentioned, 6 articles, all dealing with various, angles at which this whole gold implementation into the relations between China and Russia is unfolding. And so the very first article here is from Malaysia Chronicle, and it says, "Slow but sure death for the U.S. dollar. China and Russia getting out of greenback's control." The next article here is from the Daily News in Sri Lanka, and it's "Russia-China signs deal to bypass the dollar." Next article here is from the Russian Insider, or Russia Insider. It says, "Russia-China lay groundwork for BRICS transactions in gold." And the last 3 articles here are a little bit older articles, but yet still relevant. This is from the Daily Reckoning by James Rickards, and it says, "The dollar will die with a whimper, not a bang." And this is actually written earlier this year. And the next article here is from the National Review, and it says, "The Global De-dollarization and the U.S. Policies." And then the last article here is from the Washington Times, and it's actually from 2014, but very relevant, and just giving some background and some foundation to this whole concept of de-dollarization and bypassing the dollar. But it says, "Russia, China preparing to eliminate our reserve currency status." Then it shows a picture of Vladimir Putin, President Xi, and former President Obama. So let's dive into the very first article. And as always, I'll just thumb through it just a little bit, give you an idea what's going on, but yet leave the link below for you to find out more if you are interested. So Malaysia Chronicle. It says here, 2 years ago, ICBC, the largest and most valuable bank in the world by total assets and market capitalization, was planning to open a clearing bank in Russia for trade settlements in yuan or renminbi and rubles. ICBS's business involvement includes electricity, mining, chemical, oil and gas, telecommunication, retail, machinery, and sector in Russia. It said it makes perfect sense to get rid of the U.S. dollar. Why? Why must China and Russia conduct their business transactions using their rivals' currency? It says the U.S. dollar is so strong because of 80% of world trade takes place in the U.S. dollar. It says besides military might and power, the high demand for U.S. dollar is also driven by perception that it's the safest currency simply because U.S. is also the world's biggest economy. And then here it shows some Chinese yuan. It said last month, China and Russia decided to break their dependency on the U.S. dollar in their bilateral trade and investment. It says Bank of Russia, Russia's central bank, opened its first overseas office in Beijing on March 14th. A week later, ICBC, Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, officially opens for business in Moscow as a clearing bank for the yuan renminbi dealings. It says financial regulatory authorities of China and Russia have signed a series of major agreements which marks a new level of financial cooperation. It says the launching of renminbi clearing services in Russia will further expand local settlement business and provide and promote financial cooperation between the two countries, said Dmitry, the deputy governor of the Central Bank of the Russian Federation. So here's a interesting article here that says, why the two neighboring countries, China and Russia, who are right on top of each other, why should they be dependent upon using, as they say here, a rival's currency? So that's more of an indication why the Federal Reserve note, between those two countries, which are two pretty big, nations, if they begin really moving away from the Federal Reserve note and they're going to begin demanding payment from other countries outside of the Federal Reserve note as well. So just to give a little bit more, here says Xi Jinping, Vice President of the People's Bank of China, or Central China's Bank, calls moves as a sign with the Sino-Russian ties and financial cooperation had reached a new level. It says, quotations, China and Russia's trade volume in 2016 reached 59.5 billion. He says, I'm glad that the two countries' financial cooperation has also reached a new stage. So you have a lot of business people that are excited about this opportunity of actually them using their own currencies instead of Federal Reserve notes. So that's just an interesting take there from the Malaysian Chronicle. Let's move on to the next article. Here's the Daily News out of Sri Lanka. It says Russia, China signed deal to bypass the dollar. So this is from February as well, and it shows President Putin and President Xi there. It says, in a symbolic blow to U.S. global financial hegemony, Russia and China took a small step toward undercutting the domination of the U.S. dollar as the international reserve currency on Tuesday, when Russia's second biggest financial institution, VTB, signed a deal with the Bank of China to bypass the dollar and pay each other in domestic currency. So when you have nations' biggest banks saying, hey, why are we using, other people's money? Let's use our own. That's an indication right there that the nail has already been driven through the coffin. And now it's just a matter of it kind of twinkling down a little bit to other nations that will be required to use the ruble or the yuan in order to do business with those two countries there. And it says the so-called agreement on cooperation signed in the presence of President Xi Jinping and the Russian Vladimir Putin, who is on visit in Shanghai, was followed by the long-awaited announcement on Wednesday of a massive natural gas deal 10 years in the making. It says our countries have done a huge job to reach a new historic landmark, Putin said on Tuesday, making note of the $100 billion in annual trade that has been achieved between the two countries. Demand for the dollar, which has long served as a safe and reliable reserve currency in international transactions, has allowed the U.S. to borrow almost unlimited cash and spend well beyond its means, which some economists say has afforded the United States an outsized influence on world affairs. It says, but the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, a block of the world's first or five major economic economies, have long sought to diminish their dependence on the dollar as means of reshaping the world financial and geopolitical order. It says, in absence of a viable alternative, however, replacing it has proved difficult. So just go to show that the BRICS, the BRICS nations, five emerging nations, as it says here, have already been in cooperation kind of actually since the whole Great Recession happened. That's kind of when they ramped up things. And so those are all things that I list on that infographic with the link below that I mentioned. So next article. It says from the Russian Insider, it says Russia, China lay groundwork for BRICS transactions in gold. So we have the bypassing of the Federal Reserve note and the dealings of that currency amongst those two nations. And here's what they're going to begin using as a substitute to anchor down their currencies. It says recent progress made in streamlining trade in local currencies has brought Russia, or Moscow and Beijing, closer to creating a financial architect that could facilitate transactions in gold. It says, as reported last week, Moscow and Beijing took another step towards de-dollarization with the opening of a yuan clearing bank in Russia. So here's that term again, de-dollarization, which is ultimately saying they've begun a long time ago rethinking the dollar. It says, and earlier this month, Russia's central bank opened its first foreign bank in Beijing to allow for better communication between Russia and China financial institutions, authorities. It says, according to an article published yesterday by Sputnik, progress made in promoting bilateral trade in yuan is the first step towards an even more ambitious plan using gold to make transactions. So once again, it has a person here, shining up some gold bars. And then it's just, a different perspective from a different news syndicate saying that gold will be implemented eventually behind these currencies so that they can have an accountability to one another, being that, you can't trust someone with a printing press. You need to trust someone who has physical, tangible gold from the earth. So articles below if you're interested to read more. And now we're going to get into some of the older articles here. This is from Daily Reckoning. Mr. Jim Rickards, who's, author. If you're familiar with him, you might know his books. And so it says the dollar will die with a whimper, not a bang. And so here he usually lays out, the foundation of his articles with some histories, which looks like he's doing here. It says the same force that made the dollar the world reserve currency is working towards dethroning it. July 22nd, 1914 marked the official conclusion of the Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire. It was Bretton Woods that the dollar was officially designated the world's leading reserve currency. It says a position that it still holds today. Under the Bretton Woods system, all major currencies were pegged to the dollar at a fixed exchange rate. The dollar itself was pegged to gold at the rate of $35 per ounce. Indirectly, the other currencies had a fixed gold value because of their peg to dollar. So we'll thumb down. So he's basically saying, how we arrived to this current moment. It says from 1950 to 1970, the Bretton Woods system worked fairly well. Trading partners of the U.S. who earned dollars could cash their dollars in to U.S. treasuries and be paid in gold at a fixed rate. It says trading partners of the U.S. who earned dollars could cash their dollars into the U.S. treasury and be paid in gold at a fixed rate. It says in 1950, the U.S. had about 20,000 tons of gold. By 1970, that amount had been reduced to 9,000 tons. It says the 11,000 ton decline went to U.S. trading partners, primarily Germany, France, and Italy, who earned dollars and cashed them back into gold. And then go down even further. It says the real turning point was the period between July and November 1914, when a financial panic caused by the start of the First World War led to the closure of the London and New York Stock Exchange and made scramble around the world to obtain gold to meet financial obligations. It says at first the United States was accurately short of gold. The New York Stock Exchange was closed, so the Europeans could not sell U.S. stocks and convert the dollar sales proceeds into gold. It says within a few months, massive U.S. exports of cotton and other agricultural produce to the U.K. produced huge trading surpluses. It says gold began to flow our way from Europe back to the U.S. Wall Street banks began to underwrite massive war loans for the U.K. and France. So getting into some history aspect of how we accumulated that 20,000 tons because it came from Europe during the wars. Then I'll just go down to the bottom, get to the main point. And it says, here we go. It said gold reserve at the People's Bank of China increased to 1,842 tons at the end of 2016, according to the China Gold Association, of which those numbers that typically come from their mainstream sources, they are never to be taken seriously because they usually understate things. It says that's up 11% from the 1,658 tons it held in June 2015. It says, but China has acquired thousands of metric tons since without reporting these acquisitions to the IMF or the World Gold Council. It says China gold acquisitions is not the result of a formal gold standard, but it is happening by stealth acquisitions on the market. They're using intelligence and military assets, covert operations, and market manipulation, but the result is the same. Gold's been flowing to China in recent years, just as gold flowed to the U.S. during the Bretton Woods era. So he's kind of hitting at the fact that, the way we acquired a lot of gold because of world, chaos around us, China themselves are purchasing gold. And I wonder why. And so this is more of the idea of the de-dollarization process. It says other countries, including BRICS members, Brazil, India, South Africa, have joined Russia and China to build institutions that could replace the balance of payments lending of the IMF and development lending of the World Bank. And so that goes into the AIIB, which is a banking institution formed by the BRICS that's going to be a key role in these transactions here. It says the decline of the dollar as a reserve currency started in 2000 with the advent of the euro and accelerated in 2010 with the beginning of a new currency war. And so he goes on to lay a little foundation there. But yet he does a lot of work as far as, looking at the global gold exchange and sales and dealing a lot with the whole SDR concept of it being, world money one day. And so this, something to check into if you're interested. Next article from the National Review. It says the global de-dollarization and the U.S. policies. So here we have just someone holding up some $20 bills and give you an idea of what's going on here. It says until the mid-20th century, the gold standard was dominant monetary system based on fixed quantity of gold reserves stocked in national banks, which limited lending. It said at that time, the United States managed to become the owner of 70% of the world gold reserve, excluding Russia. Therefore, it pushed a weakened competitor, the UK, aside, resulting to the creation of the Bretton Woods system. But a quarter century later, this system has proven ineffective due to its inability to contain the economic growth of Germany and Japan, along with the reluctance of the U.S. to adjust its economic policies to maintain the dollar-gold balance. At that time, the dollar experienced a dramatic decline, but it was saved by the support of a rich oil exporter. So that's, the whole idea of becoming the petrodollar. Then it gives a little history here. Let's scroll down to the bottom. It says, analysts between that the share of the United States in today's world gross domestic product suggests shouldn't exceed 22%. However, 80% of international payments are made with U.S. dollars. It says as a result, the value of the U.S. dollar is exceedingly high in comparison with other currencies. That's why consumers in the United States receive import goods at extremely low prices. So the fact that we're able to have everything come from China directly nowadays, at extremely cheap costs, has a lot to do with the world reserve currency we have. It says under these circumstances, those heading against the dollar are considered a direct threat to the U.S. economic hegemony and the high living standards of its citizens, and therefore political and business cycles in Washington attempt by all means to resent this process. Talking about the bypassing dollar theme. It says, however, in recent years, despite Washington's desire to use whatever means to sustain its position with the international arena, U.S. policies are increasingly faced with opposition. It says the Russian government held a meeting on de-dollarization in the spring of 2014 with the Ministry of Finance announced a plan to increase the share of ruble domination contracts and the consistent abandonment of dollar exchange. It says last May, this is older article, at the Shanghai summit, the Russian delegation managed to sign the so-called deal of the century, which implies that over the next 30 years, China will buy 400 billion worth of Russia's natural gas while paying in rubles and yuan. So this goes back, give you a little history of how, during our QE process, when our government was basically allowing the central bank to print money out of nowhere to pay for, the banking systems of failures, other nations were saying, hey, if they're going to print money out of nothing and borrow money out of, and not be able to pay it back, we might as well rethink holding these dollars. So that's the information there if you're interested. And the very last article here is from the Washington Times, and it's actually from 2014, but it lays a little bit more of a groundwork to understanding the whole de-dollarization / rethinking the dollar concept. It says Russia, China preparing to eliminate our reserve currency status. And then we have here recently an Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation or APEC summit in Beijing. Dignitaries from around the world gathered to promote greater economic cooperation. It says at APEC, the United States and China finalized a new deal that will limit greenhouse gas emissions. President Obama hailed the agreement as a milestone in the China-U.S. relationship, but it is this flowering of a new relationship. The climate deal itself places China at an advantage. The U.S. has agreed to double the pace of its carbon dioxide reductions after 2020. It says while President Obama is touting his success and using it to promote a climate change agenda at the G20 summit, the deal that everyone should be paying attention to is the energy deal between Russia and China. While the deal is minor in comparison to the total global consumption, the 30 billion cubic meters per year is one of the top 38 billion cubic meters per year deal already signed, with more potential deals in the future. The biggest headline of this deal is how China will be paying for it. And it says, in a deliberate shunning of the dollar, Russia will be receiving renminbi as payments for oil. So this goes back to 2014, where this initial deal was made that they will begin working on improving their relationship so that they can begin supporting one another's economies with their own currency. So it says currently the U.S. dollar holds the status of the world reserve currency. As a world reserve currency, the majority of global trade is U.S. dollars. Because nearly everybody uses the dollar, this creates a tremendous demand around the world and gives the U.S. government an advantage in international borrowing. So that kind of right there, wraps up the idea of the governments nationwide have begun rethinking the dollar, because the U.S. for the most part has abused its privilege of holding the reserve currency for so many years now, and especially after the 2009 fiasco and how our central bank responded with buying assets or quote unquote assets off the market to prop up the banking sector, show the world that the banks or the central bank operates in its best interest, only in its own interest, and our government kind of turns a blind eye to that and allows that to happen. So Russia, China, is only natural that every 40, 50 years there's a shift in our monetary system. And so right now the rethinking the dollar concept has already begun. That's kind of how I came up with the idea of rethinking the dollar. And so if governments and nations can rethink, the dollar, why shouldn't the citizens that are dependent upon the Federal Reserve note to begin rethinking as well? So this plays into the whole dollar paradigm shift is already underway. And so the goal is to share news with you so that you can understand what's happening and begin to, explore and learn and to educate, and as well as prepare, for the day that, Russia, China, and the partners that do business with them say, there will be no need whatsoever to even hold Federal Reserve notes. And then at that point, every piece of paper that's been ever been created and held outside this country will come flowing in. And at that point, that's when, pardon my French, but all hell will break loose. So that's the news for today. Hope you guys enjoyed it, or learned something rather. I want to once again point to you the dollarcation infographic, which is right here to my side. It's something to give you an actual walkthrough of recent events as well as our nation's history, and understanding the importance of precious metals and how our coinage and things like that played a major part in our economy up until the last 40 or 50 years. So with that being the case, look forward to seeing you again on another episode. Thanks.